Okay, so I am back with the Bogner Uber Ultra here. I've done a couple of different things to my setup to figure this amp out. And I kind of wanted to share some of that stuff with you. And then we're going to do some cool stuff. I want to roll a couple of tubes around in it and kind of see how that goes. So this video will kind of be like a journey of discovery. I want to be clear, there are no conclusions or any vast, final statements of the amp, right? This is just kind of figuring the amp out, working with it, that sort of thing. To me, this amp is kind of a tough amp to figure out, right? It's like a 2C plus or something. There's a lot in the Bogner Uber Ultra to unpack. There's so many features, so many options, and in traditional Reinhold Bogner fashion, some things don't work exactly the way you think they work, or they change around depending upon flipping other switches and things like that. So I would say, if you're looking for a plug-and-play amp, this is probably not it. But if you want to tweak around with it, I think you can get some really, really awesome tones out of it. Okay, so first things first, what's the first thing I did? Well, the first thing I did was get rid of my Fryette power station. I mentioned to you guys before that the power station sometimes doesn't play well with like really, really, really high gain amps. I assume it's because there's too much tube stuff going on. I'm not really 100% sure. But it just doesn't tend to play very well with those amps. So I decided to pull that out. So I am running my little reverb and delay pedal in the loop just to give it some wetness to the sound, but just a tiny, tiny amount. But other than that, I have completely eliminated the power station and all that stuff. Second thing I've done is change cabinets. So I've moved over to a Mesa cabinet. This is a Mesa Boogie 4x12 slant rectifier cabinet with the Mesa V30s running at 8 ohms. So nothing crazy, right? I mean, you go buy these for like $500-600, right? Like nothing crazy. Definitely sounds better through this cabinet. This amp really cries out, I think, for a darker cabinet. The Marshall cabinet, wasn't bad or anything, but it might have been a little bit too bright, a little bit too much mids maybe, right? Whereas this cabinet is more for, big, heavy distortion, kind of fizzy amps, right? And that's definitely what this amp is. So it sounds a million times better with those two things, right? No power station and with the Mesa Boogie cabinet. So definitely those two things sound a lot better. Couple of other tips that I want to pass on and a couple of other things I've changed. So I've changed guitars as well. This is a much darker guitar. This is a Friedman NoHo 24. This guitar is tuned to E flat, and we'll drop it even further to drop C sharp to check that out. But this is just a much darker guitar than the Tom Anderson I was using the other day. The pickups in this are the Friedman Triple D, so it's basically I think like 15 or 16K in the bridge and I don't know, like 8 or 9K in the neck or something. So definitely a very different guitar, very different feel, very different setup. So you can see kind of how much the setup really matters in an amp. Okay, a couple of tips I want to pass along that really have worked for me. So the first thing I want to pass along before we start rolling tubes around and such is the most important control on this amp, actually, I think, my opinion, one man's opinion, is the density control. I think the density control by far is the most important switch on this amp. And I was running it completely wrong. I'm just going to be honest, right? Like I was running it completely wrong. I did the thing most people do, which is what you start with your controls low or at noon, right? And then you kind of move them around a little bit, right? And so usually with power amp controls, I usually start around 4, right? So like, you know, if I get a new Marshall or a new, you know, Friedman or whatever, right? I usually set the presence depth, you know, or thump or whatever at 4. And that's just kind of like my starting point. I even do that on old Marshalls, like the JMP, right? Like I'll start with it on 4 and just like see where it goes. That is the wrong thing to do with this amp. So the density control kind of functions a little bit in the opposite of what you would expect. So I'm pretty confident that the density control is really just a variable negative feedback, is really what it is. And my understanding from talking to some people and reading some posts and things like that is that actually the density knob fully maxed out all the way to 10 is actually the OG Uber sound. That's actually the real Uberschall sound from the, you know, the old ones, right? Is it fully maxed out? So maximum negative feedback. So what I recommend you do with the density control is start all the way up, right? Start all the way up. And that's going to give you the darkest, smoothest tone. And then I recommend you back the density control off to taste. So instead of starting at 0 or 4 or whatever, and then raising it or lowering it to taste, I recommend you max it out to 10 and then dial it back a little bit to taste. So let me show you what I mean. So I've turned it all the way up to 10 right now, and you're going to hear a little bit of a different tone from what we heard in the first clip. The volume's also going to drop because the more negative feedback you put into the circuit, the quieter the amp gets. So I am going to compensate just a little bit by turning the volume control up on this channel. I'm not going to turn up the master volume, I'm just going to turn up the volume on this channel, okay? So here is the like OG Uberschall tone in terms of the density, right? Like turning it all the way up, okay? So here we go. Darker and smoother, right? It got a lot darker and smoother. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lower the volume control on the channel again, just because we're going to play with the density control and the volume is going to change, okay? So here's our sound. Now I'm going to lower the density control to where I normally put it. So you're going to hear it. Going even further. So you can hear how that dramatically changes the sound, right? And that was only taking the density control from 10 to maybe like, I don't know, 8 or 7, right? So it's very, very, very sensitive, okay? Very, very sensitive. So definitely crank that bad boy up. Find a sound, you know, that sounds pretty good, but maybe a little dark, maybe a little smooth, kind of maybe the classic Bogner kind of thing, right? Little dark, little smooth, and then bring it down to taste, okay? So I think that's the first big thing that you want to do, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and set it back to where I had it. The way I remember it is it's just simply at 3 o'clock. That's where I normally put it, at 3 o'clock. But your mileage may vary, right? I mean, that's just with my setup here. Okay. Second thing I want to point out is the hair control. Okay, so the hair control, this one right here, if the density is the most important control on this amp, I think hair might actually be the second most important control in this amp. And I realize these are controversial. People are going to say that shit over here is more important, blah, 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 blah. But I'm just giving you my opinion, right? So in my mind, what this does is this is almost like a second variable negative feedback control. It's not, I want to be clear, it affects the presence knob, right? And the way that the presence works in the power amp, but it feels like a negative feedback. Let me show you what I mean. So right now I've got it on Hair Plus, okay? So this is the sound on Hair Plus. Regular hair. And then here's Uber, the leftmost one, the little U thing. That makes a massive difference, right? Almost like 3 totally different amps, right? 3 completely different voicings. So in my last video, I kept that switch mostly on U because in the manual that comes with the amp, it says that that is the OG Uberschall setting. So, you know, in my attempt to capture what an Uberschall is, because I've never owned one before, I put it on that. But actually, it's my least favorite one. It's my least favorite one. When you put the U there, when you put it in U mode, the amp gets very hard and very brittle. And I understand that, you know, there might be some settings where that's useful, right? Like maybe if you've got a really down-tuned 7-string guitar, or, you know, you're Steph Carpenter and you're playing like an 8-string tuned to A flat or something, right? You know, maybe that will help the amp jump out. But I think if you're playing in something like, you know, E flat or D or something like that, you're probably going to fare better on Hair or Hair Plus. So those 2 things I think are really the most important initial takeaways that I have. The density control and this little switch for hair is really the 2 massive things that, I'll be honest, frankly, like I kind of got wrong, right? So what I was doing before, just for your awareness, is I kept it in U mode and I kept the density extremely low. So like, let me show you what that would sound like. So if I put it on U and I set my density back all the way to the left, first thing you can hear is the noise floor of the amp has come up a lot. Okay, so I can hear a hiss, an audible hiss right now, right, that I couldn't hear before. I'm gonna lower the volume because it's gonna be louder than hell. Let's see how loud it is. It's pretty loud. Let me see if I can get it to go just a little quieter. Okay, so this was kind of the tone I had the other day, right? And in standard tuning, which probably, you know, and with a brighter guitar. So all these things factored into it, right? But this was the sound I had the other day, more or less. You can hear it's very, very nasal, a lot of high mids, and generally made the amp just a lot more unpleasant, maybe is the right word, right? Just more unpleasant. So I'll go ahead and go back to Hair Plus, and I'll put the density control back where it was. I'm going to lower the treble just a little because this is how I'll get to this in a second, but that's how I'm kind of setting it at this moment. I'll raise my volume back up, and you'll hear the sound I've got now. Better, I think, right? A much, much, much better sound. Maybe, I want to be clear. I don't think that setting the density lower is bad. I don't think that using the U mode is bad, okay? But it's just going to depend on your setup, your tuning, your style, right? All of those types of things. For me, this produces a much better result, okay? So that's my advice about those two switches. Now, in terms of the stuff on the right over here, okay, so let's talk about these two channels and talk about especially the right channel. So these two channels are not identical by default, okay? So if you were to set the settings exactly the same and go back and forth, they're not identical. But they can be made to sound very similar, okay? So just sort of keep that in mind. Now let's start on the right channel, okay? So first things first. You want to be really conservative with the treble and the gain controls. This amp has an insane amount of gain, okay? So you want to be a little bit conservative with the gain control. Right now, that was at about 11 o'clock on the Uber mode. So just kind of regular, right? So, and you can hear it's got plenty of gain. I mean, we are not at shortage for gain. Not hurting for gain. Okay, so be conservative with your gain control, especially in Uber and Ultra modes, right? Crunch actually has a lot of gain, which I'll show you in a second, but be conservative with that. Second thing is the treble. Yesterday, I'll be honest, I was just running the treble way too high, right? Way too high. This amp, you want to run the treble under noon. Let's just be honest, like for most intents and purposes. And don't get me wrong, again, you could have a different guitar, different setup, different whatever, but I think if I were you, I would start under noon. Let me show you. So right now, this channel on the right channel, which is the darker channel, is at about, 9:30, 10 o'clock, and it's still pretty bright, right? I mean, not like bright, but it's, it's got treble. Okay, so if I increase it, let's go up to noon. Treble, especially in the beam, right? Like, so for your camera and like in the first 5 rows of the gig, right, are going to get a lot of ear-piercing treble. So just keep that in mind. Yesterday day before, I don't know, whenever I made that other video, I was running it even higher. So I was running it like this. Not a bad sound, but that is that fatiguing ear frequency that like JCM 800s have, right? It's like, man, after 5 to 10 minutes of that, you're just going to be like, holy shit, right? So my recommendation is take it easy on the treble, right? I mean, take it easy. Obviously, you know, you can do whatever you want, but take it easy on the treble. I think setting it back around 9, 10 o'clock like this is really where you want to get started, you know? You can always raise the presence, right? So like, for example, I'm going to come down here. I have the presence and depth right now straight up at noon for this demo, right? And honestly, that's where I found they work best for me personally. But like, look, if I, you know, just want a little treble bite, instead of increasing the treble here, which is going to be like pretty harsh, I recommend increasing it here. So here is our before sound. Presence up. So it got you that treble cut, right, without like getting the ear-piercing frequencies, right? So my advice is keep the treble on your channels under control, especially the left channel, which we'll talk about in a second. And then use the presence knob to give yourself a little cut. I think that that's really the best way to go about it. I'm going to go ahead and move it back to noon because that's kind of like where my default is, but definitely use that, right? It kind of reminds me a little bit of a nailer or a naked, where you really want to jack the presence, right? Like on those two amps, you really want to jack the presence to get that like in your face, clawing, scraping, scratching kind of sound. And I think it's the same thing on the Uber, right? Like keep your treble under control and then turn the presence up if you need to. Okay. One other thing I want to talk about on the right here is the importance of the bright, focus, and doom, and the metamorph with the tight and fat. So let me explain that for a second. So I would say with the focus, doom, and bright, this is probably maybe the third most important switch or something on this amp. It really dramatically affects the voicing of the amp. Bright mode, I don't really find all that useful because again, the amp I feel like is already pretty bright, but it can be useful in extremely down-tuned situations. So I'll drop this into drop D in a second or drop C sharp in a second, and I'll show you that it does have some use, right? But I think really you probably want to spend most of your time in focus or doom, in my opinion. Doom, I think I was a little bit like, I hate to say this, but I was a little like scared of, because I was like, oh, doom, like doom metal, like that fuzzy doom metal sound. Yeah, like I don't want that, right? So I'm never going to use that. But I wish they had chosen another name like dark, you know, or eclipse or something, right? But it actually is awesome. So and you can set it even with fat mode to get a really cool sound. So let me go ahead over to doom, and I got it on fat and the metamorph at about 1 o'clock, and you're just gonna get a really, really, really thick sound. I mean, like huge chords, you know? That fuzziness, but I want to keep that thick feel, then what you want to do is leave it on doom. And yesterday, I think what I was doing is going to focus or going to bright, which I shouldn't have done, right? Leave it on doom and then flip the metamorph switch from fat to tight. Don't even touch the knob. Start by just flipping the switch and see how it sounds. Metamorph affects the feel of the amp, and this is going to be something that's really hard to like convey in video. But let's say you're like, hey, I like that sound, but it's a little bit too woofy still. That's when you would want to dial the metamorph back, maybe from 1 o'clock to 11 o'clock, and now you're going to get a much tighter sound. But the sound is going to change slightly, like the EQ is going to change slightly. So let's take a listen. Okay, so change just a little bit, right? I personally like to do this. I like to do doom, fat at 1 o'clock where I had it, and then what I'll do is I'll turn the presence up to get my cut. That way I keep that really big low end, but I get a little bit of cut with the presence. So I'll up the presence to where I had it on the demo before when I increased it, and leave it on doom and fat, and let's check that out. It's like a super rectifier, right? It sounds a lot, so I was playing that Incubus song because I think this setting sounds a lot like a rectifier. Let's say you say like, yo, I want it to sound more like a rectifier. What should you do? You can come over and mess with the density control, right? Maybe you increase it to get even a darker, smoother sound. Or maybe you're like, no, I want it more raw and in your face. Cool. Let's fuck with the density control, right? So let's go ahead now and I will adjust the density to taste. I could feel my skull rattling. Yeah, that is definitely an experience. I will say that. If there's one thing this amp has, is like when you turn it up, man, your head is gonna rattle. So yeah, it's definitely aggressive and it is definitely in your face. So yeah, and that was all with doom and fat. You see what I'm saying? Like this amp is so fucking weird, right? Like you would think like, oh, to get that type of sound, I probably need focus and I probably want to tighten it up. And it's like, no, man, like that's it, right? There's the sound. So, you know, and I did that just with a couple of small adjustments, right? Density, presence, right? I mean, it's like, it's a very, very, very sensitive amp, okay? Very, very, very sensitive. Okay, now let's do one more thing and then I'm going to cut and we'll roll around some preamp tubes and we'll see like what the situation is with that because I kind of want to see how it sounds with some more premium preamp tubes than JJ's. I generally don't like JJ's that much, but look, anyways, I digress. So the last thing I want to show you is channel 1 and channel 2. So channel 1 or the left channel, they're really not numbered, but let's call the left channel channel 1, okay? So channel 1 on the left is much brighter than channel 2 on the right, okay? It is much, much, much brighter, okay? So what I've got here is basically similar settings. I've got the gain pretty much the same. I'm gonna raise it just a little on this channel to match The bass is the same, the middle is now the same, and the treble is now the same. The bright switch is not engaged, okay? So let's have a listen, and I'm gonna go ahead and make sure this isn't like blowing the room apart right now, so let's see. Woo! Hear what I'm saying? Much brighter. Both of those are Uber mode. And the EQ is literally almost exactly the same. Totally different sound, right? Like completely different sound. Loud as fuck, by the way. I'm gonna turn the density control up a little bit to help with the volume because like my neighbors are gonna complain it's loud as fuck in here. Okay, so. Okay, so you get what I'm saying, right? Like, you can set the EQs identically and the left channel will be brighter than the right channel. Now, I'm not saying that's a problem. I'm just saying that you need to know that, right? And I didn't know that at first yesterday, right? I think I was trying to use this channel a lot because I wanted to try and figure out the metamorph and stuff later. But this channel is much harsher and much harder to dial in. You generally need to lower the treble quite a lot. Like, I'm gonna lower it to like 9 o'clock. I think the first settings I had that were recommended to me by someone on a forum, which thank you so much. I think it was Blake on Rig Talk. And he said basically like, put your gain like here, put your treble at 9 o'clock, put your middle at like 10 o'clock, put the bass at noon, and then kind of like alter to taste. And this is all on the Uber mode on the left channel, right? And this will get you a pretty good sound. The left channel is better for stuff like that. So like when you want to like have a bunch of like ringing notes, like how those were ringing, the left channel is a little bit better for that because it's a little bit clearer. The brightness adds a little clarity to it. Whereas the right channel is really just more about like aggression, right? Like I'm not saying it wouldn't sound good with that riff you're going to hear in a second, but I think it's a little clearer on the left channel. Darker on the right channel, right? Just a little bit darker. So kind of keep that in mind. Now, you might be like, yo, Mike, can I switch it over to bright? Ah, that is when I have found a use for bright mode on the right channel. So if you're trying to get like this channel and this channel to match, it might be useful to use bright mode on the right channel. And then like what somebody was suggesting was you leave this in Uber mode and this is kind of your like crunch channel. I don't want to use the word crunch, but this is your kind of like normal distortion channel. And then you put this in ultra mode or something and have it be like your solo channel or your lead channel or an extreme channel or whatever, right? So if you want to make a match a little bit more, you might actually use the bright mode on that one. I'll put it, I want to show you really quickly the difference between focus and bright and doom on the right-hand channel, though, now that you've experienced the left channel. And you'll see that it'll kind of match up. So first I'll do doom, then I'll click, and then I'll do focus, and then I'll click, and I'll do bright. Bright mode brought out a little bit of clarity, just like the clarity in the left channel, right? So I think that's a time when bright mode makes sense. Okay, last thing I'm going to say, and then I promise I will cut and move on, but there's just a lot to talk about with this amp. The other thing I want to say is ultra mode. Okay, so ultra mode in my video the other day really struggled with the power station. I mean, it was brutal. I'm sure you can go back and listen to it. It was pretty insane. I have figured out how to make that channel work. It still has a lot of gain, and I still maintain that a lot of the gain on that channel is, I'm sorry, but it's unusable, right? But you can get some really cool sounds out of it. If you put it in doom mode, you lower the gain to about 9 o'clock, okay? So pretty low, right? Completely left, right? And then I'll flip it over to ultra. Okay, so this will get you, and if you watch the treble, right? Remember, watch your treble control. Don't go too crazy, you know? And this will get you, and I'm still in doom mode, right? I'm in doom, fat, ultra, okay? And this will get you a really extreme sound. I mean, really extreme. So that's at 9 o'clock, right? So like, I'm really struggling to imagine a world in which you need more gain than like 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or something, right? You definitely do not want to turn ultra mode to like noon or something. It's going to be, unless you've got like an insane noise gate, it's going to be completely freaking useless, right? And boosting ultra mode is even more ridiculous. So like, again, I'm not trying to bash the amp. I'm just saying like there's so much gain on ultra mode. It's fucking crazy, right? It's totally fucking crazy. Okay. Last thing is crunch. I just want to show you crunch mode for like a second. I got a really cool sound with crunch mode the other day by diming the gain. So I totally dimed the gain on crunch mode. And then you had an option to up the treble a little bit more in crunch mode, which was pretty cool. And then I also used the boost, which was pretty cool. So I think I'm still in doom, fat, and now I'm on crunch. I might switch to focus, but like, I'll just show you. It actually sounds pretty cool. I'll switch to focus. Right? I mean, like, what else can I say? I mean, it sounds fucking awesome. And then if you want more chunk, you know, because that facelift sound is kind of nasally sometimes, just up the density or down the density, you know, just bring it down, or use the switch to switch from hair plus to hair or something, and you're going to get it, you know. I'll split the density back up, and I'll move from hair plus to hair. want to do something like... So there you go. Definitely cool. I think crunch mode is really cool. I know somebody in a thread somewhere called me an idiot or something for like going for crunch mode, but I think it sounds fucking awesome. So definitely a lot in this amp to figure out, right? But you can see really like I'm making very minor moves, right? Very, very minor moves that result in very large changes, okay? So I would say with the Uber Ultra, like awesome amp, definitely very cool. I'm not sure if it's ultimately like a for me keeper amp to add to the collection because it's just really aggressive. But with the right cabinet and the right settings and the right guitar, it fucking rips. I mean, it will shatter your skull. It is a fucking amp to just bash you over the head. So if that's what you're looking for, this is the one. All right, so I'll post some more videos and like a full review and stuff maybe once I do some more stuff with it. But I kind of just wanted to share like the journey of figuring this amp out, you know, and kind of just trying to make sense of it because it's so different from most of the other amps in here. So again, this is Mike from Eldorado Guitars. Thanks for hanging out. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Please like and subscribe. It really does help me out and help the channel. Thanks, guys. Peace out.